Hello, and welcome to another Aspire 2021 session. Thank you so much for joining us. If you don't know me, my name is Brianna, and I'm the Volunteer Engagement Manager here at Venture to Impact. And today we have Heidi Weigand here with, Dr. Heidi Weigand, but to me you're just Heidi, here with us today. She is a member of the Safe Assured Research Team at the Dalhousie Rowe School of Business here in Halifax, and focuses primarily on leadership development, systemic discrimination, and resiliency. Examples of her work include the study of a leader's ability to manage the balance of positive and negative emotions and the extent to which this practice vicariously affects the development of an innovative mindset in followers, and the study of motivating factors and communication technologies that influence Generation Z or Z here in Canada, leaders to drive responsible change. Heidi is also a member of Venture to Impact's board, which we're very grateful for. And if you joined us for Aspire last year as well, you got to meet Heidi then and hear about her resiliency research, which was fundamental to our conversation last year. So we're really excited to have her with us again today. So Heidi, thanks so much for being here.
Great. Thanks so much, Brianna. Can you hear me? Excellent. Great. So thank you. I really appreciate the invitation. And I think I'll sort of put the context that I'm going to be talking a little bit about kindness, right? And well, no, that's the part. We're being kind to one another. You help me here, I help you. And this is actually what I'm going to kind of talk about. So I'm looking at the role of kindness and collaboration. And I had the privilege of working with a number of different researchers. As we were entering into COVID-19, we decided to look in last year at a worldwide study on kindness and to see if there's differences between what we call Gen Y and Gen Z. And so this was really interesting because the world was in a lot of sort of chaos. There's a lot of different stages of stress and, what am I going to do? And how do I know what's going to happen the next day, let alone, a month later or a year later. And so we started to see things like John Krasinski, I think that's his name, started to put a show up about good news movements because we tended to see a lot of really negative things in the news. So it was really a nice place to be able to spend 3 or 4 months studying kindness. And it was really interesting what we found. And so I kind of want to share some of that today. So I thought maybe one of the ways to do that is just to give some context. So I have a few slides here just to show you, and not to slide you so that you can't don't want to focus on anything, but just to give a little bit of an understanding. So even the front piece here, and Brianna, you let me know if you don't see something, it's just giving the context that it's sort of, you can see me in the background there. There's a lot of, the bubbles are there. The answer is it's this dream world when you go into kindness because you think you understand it. And the answer is it's actually really hard for somebody to define it. So think for a moment. You said, what is kindness? We asked this question, what do people sort of associate with kindness? And it's funny, it's one of those things where people go, oh, I know the answer. And then as they start to describe it, they go, yeah, so I don't actually know how to really say it. And then we found out that people really associate it with a lot of different behaviors. Sometimes it's being empathetic. Sometimes it's about being helpful to somebody. Another time it's just being nice. But then people said, well, okay, well, hold on. What if I think of the opposite to kindness? So then we said, okay, well, what is it to not be kind? And people went, oh, evil, mean, cruel. And we went, okay, so we've got these really big polarities here, but we're having trouble really making sense of it. So what we really wanted to do in this particular study, though, is try to understand the differences between 2 big players in the workforce right now, and that's Generation Y and Generation Z. So I'm just going to kind of frame this. So if we look at generations, here's a nice little chart just to show you. We have what's called the greatest generation, sort of born 1901 to 1924. We have the silent generation that a lot of people are very familiar with, so 24 to 45. We have our big baby boomers. They're taking up a big part of our life. So, they're in that 46 up to 64. Gen X is where I hail from. Thank you, friends. All of the nice pictures there. Although it's funny when I see little comments, people go, "Friends, that's old." And I'm like, yeah, it was good for me. I love the show. But then we really get into Gen Y, which is the millennials. And this is sort of ranges 1977 to 1995, and Gen Z, which is sort of 1996 to 2010. And I'll explain why that arrow doesn't stop there. We do have another generation, and I'll speak to them. So I'm really interested in these last two because they make up a huge percentage of our existing leadership in the workforce and our incoming leaders. So you think about it and you go, well, I want to know what they think of kindness. It actually became really important because there are big differences in the way that they see kindness. And so I want to kind of play that out a little bit. So why generations? Well, you might say, okay, that's going to stereotype people. It's an ageism thing. Is it a discrimination thing? Well, here's what kind of happens is that depending on when you're born, there's certain events that are going on around you, can be political, social, economic, environmental, certainly technology, and they give us these general world views. Now, you have to add on culture, because if I'm born in sort of Halifax, Nova Scotia, as an example, but one of my friends is born in Rio de Janeiro, or somebody is born down in Sydney, or any of the beautiful countries in the world, the context of what they see is going to be very different. So we do have this intersectional sort of lenses. But in general, especially with social media, we can look at last year as an example. COVID-19, Black Lives Matter, these are major social movements and health movements that have an impact on the economy. And as we're growing up, it makes a difference in the way we see our lives. You ask a Gen Z, going to a concert. I asked a couple of people, "Oh, you're going to a concert, what's it going to be like?" And one person says to me, "Oh, I can't wait to hear the music. It's going to be amazing. Have no idea if there'll be bathrooms." Kind of a baby boomer, thinking back to some of those things. You ask a Gen Z and they go, "Oof, I hope it doesn't get bombed." Right? Like and that's a response, right? And you go, okay, well, how does that come to be? And the answer is, what are they used to seeing in the news? What are they used to seeing in the context of their social environment? How safe do they feel? Right? And so these are things that sort of factor in. So let's separate the two a little bit then to get an understanding. Gen Y tend to be, and I'm generalizing, but this is in the research, pragmatic, hopeful, determined, creative. They tend to think laterally and value what we call, and this is really important, egalitarian approaches, right? They have had significant influence over the workplace. And you notice there's a lot of open space in the workplace and a lot of common areas. That's Gen Y's influence. Gen Z, different. They're immersed in everything digital. So right from birth, they've been into the digital world. They're very savvy researchers. They value and curate identities. They have a strong appreciation for frequent communication and feedback, but they like more highly personalized environments. It's especially, for example, in the workplace, they actually like a closed space, a closed office environment where they have some control over what's theirs. They don't love the open environment. Now, these are generalizations, but it kind of gives you a bit of perspective. So when it came to the research on kindness, and this is where Brianna just it's really interesting to see it, but Gen Y saw it as self-sacrificing. So they see it as something, an active behavior where someone else's interests are prioritized over their own. But what they made sense of it, how they made sense of it is, well, it's the right thing to do. So they're always coming back to sort of the egalitarian, like that they're looking at the fact that you should do this. It's an obligation to do this. And so words that we saw were showing compassion, empathy for those around you and acting accordingly, being aware of how your actions impact other people, and, outwardly going out of your way to do things that will have positive emotional and practical implications for them. Thank you, right? To be respectful in ways it says, whether it's doing it as a sacrifice of oneself or, like going out of your way to do it for someone else. So this is the key, is that there's a sacrifice involved in it. There's this idea that there's some form of you must do it. It's the right thing to do. Well, guess what? We go over to Gen Z, and they don't really see it as self-sacrificing. They, on the other hand, see it as a natural way of respecting others. It's just a natural part of the process. Of course, you're going to be kind to someone else. And so things that we saw where kindness is simply watching out for other people's needs, observing who's observing your surroundings and see who can be helped, and making other people's lives easier. It's no big sacrifice for yourself. They're saying it's not really a sacrifice. It's just a way of living. And so when we started to look at this, and I'll stop sharing these slides, it was kind of interesting to see these differences show up. So then we said, when you're in the workplace, this expectation of how kindness shows up, one generation is sort of looking at it as, well, you should do it. And another one is kind of looking at it going, well, of course you would do it. And that can actually cause tension. So Brianna, I don't know if you wanted to reflect on that a little bit, maybe even thinking of your own experience.
Yes. Well, one thing that came to mind as you were initially talking about kindness was I was just listening to one of Brene Brown's podcasts, and she was talking about the difference also between nice and kindness. Mm-hmm. So she was talking about it within the context of, we use being nice as an excuse not to give feedback or have hard conversations. We're like, then I'm not being nice to somebody. But yeah, pulling apart the difference between nice and kindness. Did you see that in your research as well?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. A lot of people, some, not all, certainly use the word nice as, a pseudonym for it. They thought, well, this is the same thing as being nice. But then when you actually kind of got into it with them, they would say, okay, well, kindness is a little different. It's the idea of looking out for somebody. So here's the thing. If somebody asks you, how do I look today? Right. And the person's hair is going out and sideways and everything. We call this sometimes the little white lie, right? Where somebody would say, oh, you look great. Right. Well, another person might say, I think you have an obligation to tell them, because that's a kind thing to do, in the sense that, they're walking around and everybody else is looking at them. So, and if you looked at that, you might say, well, that's a nice thing to do. Well, kindness actually had a little bit more meat to it. It was saying, mm-hmm. You're taking the responsibility for the other person's well-being. And there's a bit of a superficial difference between one, it's sort of surface level, and the other one's down. So there's a little bit more of an action involved and more of accountability with kindness.
Mm.
So
yeah. No, I like that. The other thing I was thinking as you were sharing was just, I'm Gen Y, so I was like, which definition do I agree more with when it comes to kindness? And I probably relate more to the Gen Y of, it's sometimes self-sacrificing or putting somebody else's needs before your own or something like that. That could be kindness. But I also like that it's just like status quo for Gen Z that we should be kind. Like that's it. I like that idea. Like,
yeah, it's and so here, let me sort of play it out. If you think in your mind, when you do something for somebody else, let's say you somebody's working really late at the office and they've got this, something else going on, and you turn around and you say, hey, let me take that for you. I'll do it. You go home. I know you've got this thing going on. I'll do that. Right. I'm sure we've all been in a situation at one point in time where you kind of help somebody. So you say, okay, well, what is that? And so if you frame it from a little bit of it's the right thing to do, you would turn around and go, well, I don't have something to do. This person does. But then there's this reciprocity. I'm sure if I do it, somebody else will then take care of me someday. Is there anything wrong with saying that? Not necessarily. Depends on the person, right? But the reality is maybe it's well, I'm going to help help Brianna today. She's going to help me on another day. And that's kindness. It's an exchange between each other. Another person would be like, and this is more of a Gen Z perspective, well, of course I'm going to do it. Why wouldn't I do it? I don't expect anything in return. It's not just the right thing to do. It's like, I want to do this for you. Mm-hmm. Very different nuances there, but they're important. So, because if you think, if you're in a room and there's kindness is something that you're talking about in a workplace, then one group might have this expectation that it's more sort of a reciprocal process that's going on. Another one would say, well, just because you did that for me doesn't mean I have to reciprocate. I mean, I did it because I just wanted to do it. So the question is where does that become a problem in the workplace? And so if you don't have the conversations, this is where dialogue and discussion become two really interesting words. And so let me just frame this. So dialogue is what we actually want. This is what creates relationship. This is what creates what I call a collaborative process. And if you look into the way we communicate one another, we use the word, let's go discuss something. But our tendency when we're discussing something is that we're coming to the table kind of wanting to persuade the other person about what we are thinking. And it typically is this idea that I wait and I'm listening to you, Brenna, and you're chatting away, and my mind's going, and I'm already thinking about how I'm going to respond so I can get my idea in there, or I want to build on yours or whatever. Dialogue means I'm here to hear you, and I'm here listening to everything you're saying, and I haven't preformed where I want to go on this one. I'm actually really interested in where our joint conversation kind of goes. And so if you think about even the nuance of kindness in here, if you have this reciprocity, then the expectation is in a conversation, you go, I go, I'm listening, we go, and there's a difference. If you take the idea that it's just natural to listen and the kindness is through that, then there's no expectation of anything. It's kind of interesting that you're creating an environment where it's just the way it is. Now, both are great. They're both kindness. But if one has a different expectation than the other, you could be in these workplaces, you could be in having dialogue with one another, you could be in having conversation, and there's this piece of reciprocity that's sitting there that is causing some tension. So even though we're being kind, we're still creating some tension. And so it's important to have the dialogue to understand what somebody's expecting. When there's an action, is there a reciprocal action expected? Or is the person just comfortable with what it is and not taking that for granted? So these are little things. It doesn't seem like it's too much of a big deal, but it's part of this. When you go into collaboration, it's a really important element there.
Yes, which we're going to get into in a second. But so, as we think about, I forgot to mention our theme at the beginning, but reimagining and evolving. So I think we would all agree that as we move forward, as we evolve, we would want more kindness in our lives. How does the challenge of those slightly different definitions of kindness affect our ability to be kind? I'll start there.
No, I think it's a great question. And so I might say it this way, like many things in the world, I can't really think of anything that isn't really in this frame. Everything is contextual. So if you say the word kindness, it means one thing to one person, it could mean a very different thing to another. And so I think it's important to recognize that. So when we say we want to bring more kindness to the workplace, well, what does that mean? We want more, I've just shown that there's a difference between at a worldview level between Gen Y and Gen Z. So, imagine bringing that down to the individual level. We all kind of may have a different perspective. Somebody may say kindness is empathy. Another person says it's about trust. Another one says it's about a give and take, right? So we can't, a leader wanting kindness in the workplace probably needs to, or I would recommend, especially being sort of in the leadership field, is to say, all right, what does that mean to us? What's the climate that we're looking for? Let's define this. And if we're saying it's in a context of something like collaboration, well, then maybe the kindness element is the fact that we do go in with the intention to have dialogue over discussion. We are interested in what the other person has to say. We are very interested to understand how we together can create a kinder environment. what's that going to look like for everybody? How's that going to feel? And what happens to conflict? Do we not have any conflict? Well, here's the kind of like twist. Is it kind to agree with somebody? Is it kind to just do it someone's way? Or is it kind to put your idea on the table that's different from someone else's, to challenge the status quo? That's a really interesting question. Is it kind to disagree? Throwing it at you. What do you think?
It's making me think back to what you said of context. So maybe there are times where it is kind not to disagree. I think in most cases, it is kind to share, a different opinion or a different way of seeing things, especially because we have our own blind spots and biases. And so I think generally it's really important that you get those different perspectives. But I could see maybe there are certain contexts where it might be kind not to.
So yeah, I think the way, if people are asking me, in this case, we're sort of talking about it, I'd say that kindness is creating an environment where people feel comfortable, welcomed, encouraged to participate, and feel respected, so that if they come up with an idea, maybe they're the first in a meeting to come up with an idea, maybe they're the last in the meeting, they're waiting, that they can expect that when they voice what they want to say, that it's actually heard.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a big difference between, the idea that you come to a meeting, everybody says everybody's included, but then when somebody comes up with an idea, you go, well, that was done before. The dismissing of an idea, right? So I think the way kindness can play itself is in collaboration, in dialogue, and it really comes down to respecting what other people have to say, even if it's different from yours. It doesn't mean you have to agree, though. Mm-hmm. The idea is that the kindness act is the fact that you're listening, hearing, sharing, collaborating, but you don't have to adopt, you don't have to agree without conflict. You can have all of that, but you just do it in a much more constructive and respectful manner.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing that it was making me think of as well is yesterday when we were talking about values, we were talking about how it's important for us to define what, if we say our value is kindness or whatever it might be, that we need to define that, because words mean different things to different people. So once again, with kindness, if we're saying we want more kindness in our life as we move forward, then we need to define for ourselves, what does that mean? So what are the behaviors that means we want to exhibit based on our definition of what kindness means for us?
And there's you hear about the golden rule, right? And this comes out in a lot of contexts, right? A lot of different, it can come out in religious context, but I'll just say it sort of from a human context. Do unto others as you would have done unto you, right? So, treat others the way you want to be treated. Well, here's something fascinating. Does my best friend want to be treated the way I want to be treated? Does my colleague in China want to be treated the exact way I want to be treated? The answer is no. So you get into what's called the platinum rule. Treat others the way they want to be treated. And I think this is where kindness comes in. It's a recognition of really asking people and engaging with people and finding out what it is they want, and have that as becoming a practice. If you keep practicing it, because you have to practice these things, then it becomes natural. And then guess what? Gen Z or Gen Z, however you want to call it, has something there, right? Which is, it becomes a natural. But there's nothing wrong with Gen Y's reciprocity piece. I mean, if I'm kind to you, you're kind to me, because that's kind of saying we want to do that together. But the natural one is it's more of it coming with practice. So it's kind of funny, but a kindness practice requires practice. Mm-hmm. It's not actually that easy to be kind. It takes effort. And let me maybe I'll give you an example of how it's hard to do.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
you come to a meeting, you've got an agenda, you've got something you have to accomplish. Time is not your friend. And everybody in the room comes up with 15 ideas, and you got to move forward on something. And the answer is you may quickly start to shut down ideas all over the place because you don't have time. And that's because this variable of time has become the valued one over everybody else's opinion. So the question is this the right format? I mean, if you're going to come to the room and you're going to ask for everybody's opinion and you don't really have time to consider it, then I would say, don't do it. Right? I mean, why did you put them in a position to think they had a voice when really you had to make a decision? Make the decision. But if you've been bringing people in all along and gathering their voice, by the time you make a decision as a leader, you probably already have their perspectives. So put it into practice. And therefore, you're probably creating a culture where people felt respected, felt included, and recognized sometimes you have to make quick decisions.
Yeah, makes me think also just back to like the clarity of purpose being key, which also makes Priya Parker start a gathering. But so if in that situation the leader's thinking about what is my purpose, then that would influence who's brought together, how the decision is made, which would then also tie into what would be kind for other people involved. So I think
roles, right? You know your roles. So at this time, I'm a decision maker leader. At this other time, I'm a collaborative. I want to bring everybody in. I want to hear from everybody. Leadership is. Coming back to leadership here because that's my space, right? But it's a philosophy more than it is. People talk about it being a construct or being as a trait or a characteristic of leadership. I mean, it's a philosophy of how we act in spaces. And sometimes the best thing you can do as a leader is step back and let everybody else lead. And you're supporting other people. And that's the greatest leadership. If you're a coach of a sports team, you don't get to play on the field when they're playing. So you got to sit back and stay on outside of the lines, and you can call things in, but reality is they're the ones who have to sort of, implement whatever the strategy is. So food, and these all revolve back. Why do I talk about kindness? Because I do a lot of work in collaboration, and collaboration is about hearing one another. It's about respecting that we're all coming to the table. Let's say we increase the circle of engagement, right? We bring people to the table. You have to make sure that you're there with the intention of hearing the other people's perspective. You have to have an understanding of what your purpose is there. And dialogue has to be a part of it. And we don't always have to agree. And I think if you do that, you'll find that people will actually say, yeah, I found it to be a very productive environment. I felt it to be a very safe environment. And what you're really doing is you're enacting kindness in a very collaborative manner. Those are my thoughts.
So Heidi, tell us more about the collaboration piece. So I think we did a good amount with kindness, and now collaboration. When we were talking together, we talked about how collaboration was so key to the vaccines being developed so quickly, just as an example. And so how do you see collaboration, like what role collaboration should play now and into the future, and what does that look like?
Well, here's you bring up the vaccine, right? And it's such an interesting thing, but if I pose it in this way, normally pre-COVID, if we had vaccines, we would go into our little silos, from a either capitalist perspective or whatever. And again, I'm, not doing this in any judgment, but, it's a economic, where we have a product, we need to bring it to market. And then there's, it's to serve community and to say, help people, but it's also an economic factor. All of a sudden, the vaccine issue comes up, and we have this worldwide crisis, for lack of a better term. And we have to collaborate. We have people collaborating from different countries. We have people collaborating from different disciplines, business with researchers with, people from one side of the health spectrum to the other, all trying to come together to figure out, where do we get this product? We need this piece of it put in as part of the supply chain, right? And what we had there is we removed our egos. We removed our silos. We came together and listened to different ideas and practices so that we could get to a point of creating something that has never existed before in a, by the way, time frame that is unheard of, right, for coming to production on something this important to society. Yet we did it. And I say we because I'm not Pfizer, I'm not Moderna, right? I'm not all the different companies that have produced this, but it's society that kind of came. We had this huge pressure, right? Where we're looking at governments, we're looking at corporations, we're looking at health entities, and we're saying, we're in crises. You need to help save us. But we're actually a part of it because we're demanding that it needs to come soon because people are dying all around the world. So we as a cat together are being we're looking and we have this empathy for what's happening in all these different countries, and then it comes to your own country. And so as an act of kindness, we're out there saying we need to save the world. Literally. Like we always talk about that expression, but we literally just went into a big collaboration to save the world. Right? And how do we do it? We listened, we dialogued, we came together, we broke down barriers, right? And if you think about the way that people did that, I mean, it's all collaboration, right? It's all about bringing your best to the table, and you had to listen and hear other people. And now let's come away from the vaccine, although it's still, in its works. I'm seeing it a lot more in workplaces. People are saying, well, the only way we solved this problem was from collaborating. You're noticing a lot more collaborations together. I was even I was on a session today, and we were talking about mental health, and we were also talking about murdered and missing Indigenous women, girls, and boys. And we said, this is not something that gets solved by one agency. Like this has to be a collaboration. I mean, you can't make movement on this kind of crises without a number of players being involved, and they have to get to the table, and they have to remove the silos and move the egos and remove the economic factors and start to look at the humans involved. It's a crisis. And so when people start to realize, that that collaboration is about removing all those things, it's interesting, but at the heart of it is kindness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So these are it's one of those things. I mean, you look at Venture to Impact. I mean, the world, the collaborations that you get involved in, and me being on board, right? In terms of how we go in and work with somebody else, we don't go in with the idea that we have the answer. It has to be a collaborative approach. You cannot go to another space or someone else, let's call it country or culture, and say, we have the way of doing it. The answer is, we have some tools. You've got some tools. If we collectively work together, we'll probably be a lot smarter and figure out something. And that's what happens. Mm-hmm. It's all about collaboration. But it has to have respect at the core of it. And respect comes back to some of those words that were used to define kindness.
Mm-hmm. It's all coming back full circle.
Good thing I do that, right? Yeah. And by the way, that's such a beautiful word to use, because I think when we work in circles, I think that when I see collaboration, I don't usually see triangles or rectangles or squares. I see circles. I don't know what you see, but when I hear the word collaboration, I kind of think of everybody working together and they're all equal. So a circle means you don't have any priority. That's what I love about sharing circles when I'm working with my Indigenous colleagues and friends and family. Right? Is in a circle, you're all equal. It just happens, where it starts and where it ends. You're all going to be a part of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I also think about how a circle is continuous, like the lines aren't broken or bending in any way. So it feels like it's a more continuous movement. which I like when thinking about collaboration as well, that it's a very continuous process.
And that's, the same as when we talk about feedback loops, right? So when you give feedback to somebody, the idea is that they should have a voice in being able to respond and say, well, this is what I'm thinking. And so guess what? We're in this circle, right? This loop. And that means that we both have voice. Right? So I think maybe that's something I'll come out of this whole conversation with. I'll go, oh, kindness always has to be in a circle. However, if you notice my slide, kindness was inside a circle. So perhaps I was thinking unconsciously there.
We do that. Yeah. Any other, I'm hearing collaboration is about respect, dialogue, bringing lots of people together, kindness. Is there any other key element of collaboration that we should know about?
Well, maybe I'll frame it because people might, it's the same as when I do a lot of work in what's called positive leadership. And so people go, oh, that's positivity. And so you never have negativity. You're always positive. I'm like, no, I have tons of negativity. I can drum up the jealous thing. I can drum up the sad and, and anger, those all things. It's just how much of the time they occupy your space, right, is what's really important. And that's what when I talked about resiliency last year, I said, it's about managing your negative to positive emotions. More positive, less negative. It's more constructive, more resourceful. Same thing, collaboration. It's not the only tool. Like you can't collaborate all the time. In sport, we have opposite sides of the team. We go in, we compete. But if you ever noticed, especially I'll take the NFL or something like that, or if you look at Premier League and soccer or something, watch at the end of the game. How many of the athletes go over to congratulate somebody else? Because you know what? They played with them on another team in their past, right? Or they went to school with them, or they just respect their ability. And so you have this team and everybody's together, very competitive, but then as soon as the whistle blows, right? There's a little bit of celebration, there's a little bit of tears, but then people come together. They share, they console one another, or they congratulate one another. And that's because they're part of a bigger circle, which is called the sporting world. And they recognize, right, the power of the unity. I was watching the Ryder Cup this past weekend, and the US team won over Europe, and there's a lot of factors there, and congratulations to them. It was excellent. But these are individual people who then came together as a collective. And when you listen to them at the end, here's what's really funny. Is the players say, this has been the most fun I've ever had in my career. These are big time golfers winning big money. And they said, I'm an individual person. We're siloed. But at the Ryder Cup, we come together, and this has been the most fun and the most important thing I will ever remember in my career. Why? Because they played as a team. Right? People like to be with one another. And collaboration is another way of doing that, working with people in a team, not so much in isolation. So, there's a lot of wisdom in the sporting world that can kind of come in and help us out.
Definitely. So then I guess the question is, how maybe do we determine when should we collaborate and when do we not?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. And so I think there are times when collaboration is really critical. And I think when there's really complex problems, if you have a very simple problem, you don't have to bring everybody together. So let's take as an example, am I going to have this for lunch, or am I going to have this for lunch? We do not need to call all our friends. However, if you see on social media, there's a ton of people who are going, what should I have for lunch? I'm trying to decide what I'm having for lunch. And I'm going, okay, so it's a whole other thing going on. Make your decision, move on. However, if you're going to plan a big event and you want to consider, I've certainly been a vegan before. I'm a vegetarian now, but vegan. And I've gone to events before, and I am starving. There is nothing there for me. And so I've become smarter about bringing my own food. But you know what? If you had a collaboration around that event and you brought in a whole bunch of different people, someone would say, have we thought about the vegetarian? Have we thought about, how many offerings do we have for that? So I think when your scope is talking about a lot of other people, I think that's when collaboration is really a smart thing to do. If it's an individual thing, I don't think you have to go out and get everybody's opinion, but I mean, we do go out and get multiple doctors' opinions, so that's not right on health. So I don't know that I gave you a full answer there, but what I would say is, as concrete as I can get it, the more people involved, I think the more you have to have voice from the different possible people impacted. And that will then help you, right, to frame who should be at the table. Is someone's voice missing?
Yeah, it's a great way of looking at it, but it makes complete sense because we have blind spots, we miss things. So it's, when we bring together those different people that we get the fuller picture.
I have a puppy in the room too, so she's just making some fun noises with a toy. So she collaborates.
Work from home life.
Yeah, exactly, right? Yeah, 5-month-old golden retriever. She's beautiful.
Aww.
But yeah, so that's, and by the way, if you ever want to see somebody who creates kindness, as far as I'm concerned, is a golden retriever. So I think dogs can teach us an awful lot too, but that's a whole other trajectory. So I don't know. Yeah, does that? So again, wrapping kindness up. This is the thing: is kindness. When I look at it, to me, and the study that we've done, Kristen Williams and I, and also Giuseppe Liuzzo, Erica Weigand, and Sophia Okafor, we looked at kindness and we understood that people don't know how to make sense of it. They really, everybody, the first gut instinct is to say, oh, this is kindness. And then when they start to describe it, they go, oh, it's a lot harder than I thought. So if you go to a workplace, it's going to be really difficult to get everybody on board with the same thing about kindness. So what we would say is, it seems to be this idea that people feel safe, right? That they feel welcomed, right? That you feel cared for. These are words that, through empathy, for trust, for niceness, right? The idea is you feel those safety things. Then when you go into a work environment where you're going to collaborate, I have a dog again making noises, I apologize. But when you go into a work environment and collaborating, then what you're going to have is a whole bunch of people trying to do that. I just saved you from a noise. So I'm probably going to have to give my poor little dog a break shortly. She's looking at me going, she's struggling right now. Anyway, my point is, I think when you're collaborating, you need to think about kindness as being at the core of that.
Great. Well, I think that sums it up, unless you have any last words related to kindness, collaboration, or how it relates to our theme of reimagine and evolve.
I think the only last words I would have is, if your intent is to help somebody else, I think you're going to lead with kindness. If your intent is to persuade others, I think you might lead with some of the other tactics that I talked about. I think it's really, when you're heading into something, whether you're have the other person's interests at heart or whether you have your own. And I don't know that it's bad to have your own interests at heart, but I wonder if it's better to have an interest in what others' interests might be. That's all. Are you open to what they're thinking and what they're wanting?
Yeah, again, I think context comes to mind, because there are times, when we need boundaries and we need to do what's best for us. And that's when, like boundaries, for example, come into place. But yeah, so what is our intention? How do we want to show up?
And by the way, speaking of kindness, the little puppy has now come all the way over here and joined our conversation. Is very calm. So
wants attention, wants to
exactly.
be in the room. Great. Okay. Well, I think those were your last words. So thank you, Heidi, and thank you everybody who joined us live and who watches this recording later. We hope that maybe we confused you a little bit since we didn't give you an exact definition, but hopefully you have a better idea of what kindness can mean, how you can show up when your intention is to lead with kindness, when to choose to collaborate, and how kindness is a key element of that. Yeah, so thank you for joining us. And we have one more session tomorrow, same time, same place. We'll be talking about navigating fear and anxiety. So as we return to in-person things or whatever it might be, I think we're all navigating some fear and anxiety, and we'll continue for the rest of our life. So if you're interested in learning more, join us tomorrow. Yeah, that's not a good last word. And thank you, everybody.
I would say that if you're talking about navigating anxiety and stresses, the best thing you can be is kind to oneself and kind to others. So
True.
There's the connection between those two sessions.
Thank you. Self-compassion, self-kindness, so key.
Yeah.
Thank
Thanks,
you for that,
Brent.
Heidi.